Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Monday, June the 20th, 2022. Before I get into the show proper, I'll just share something with you. I was thinking of starting a Substack because all the other kids are doing it. And what I would cover on the Substack is pretty much what I talk about on the show, although obviously it would be more formal and precise than what the free form that you get from me on the KMG show. Let me know if you think that's a good idea. I'm wondering about a title for it. I was thinking of The Last Real Canadian, and I thought, it's a distinctive title. But the difficulty there is that a great many people, particularly in the United States, see the word Canadian and then they switch off. They're simply not interested. So I suppose I could call it the KMG show, but no, the KMG show is a live stream. So let me know what you think about that potential title. If you have titles that you think are better than that, I would appreciate it if you would let me know. So first up, Contra democracy. Ooh, we're in the midst of a democratic crisis. Everyone is saying so. Well, our elite is saying so, which tells me one of two things, or maybe both. First, that they're frightened. And second, that this is going to be used as a means for a final consolidation of power. Now, of course, democracy comes from the Greek demos and kratos, meaning the power of the people. And as Eric von Kuhnelt-Ladin pointed out, it's rather brutal, the use of this word kratos. Now, as James Burnham taught us in the New Machiavellians, democracy is impossible on a practical basis. The world is ruled by elites and always shall be ruled by elites. But since the democratic revolution of the 19th, 20th centuries, the elites have at least paid lip service to the idea that they actually represent the people, although in recent decades, that's simply gone out the window. With the rise of globalism, we know what's best for you. You may not think it's best for you. You may not think it's best for your country, your nation, but it's best in the aggregate. The fact that they are skimming the 1% and the 1% of the 1% are skimming off the top, well, no matter. No matter. We know what's best for you. Here's a typical example of this, and this is from Supriya Dwivedi at the Toronto Star. Politicians need to do a better job of safeguarding our democracy. You see how democracy is a process, but here it's been hypothesized. Democracy has really become religious belief. And just to remind you, when they say democracy, what they mean is they win always. So she begins. Recent polling from Abacus Data found that just over half of Canadians agree with this statement, quote, official government accounts of events can't be trusted, unquote. All politicians should be united. There we go, united in trying to preserve faith in our public institutions and actively working to safeguard the literal democracy in which they currently serve. Literal democracy, very satirical. The federal government claims to care about this, but it's hard to take that claim seriously. They often hide behind a mix of government bafflegab and focus group talking points instead of speaking plainly and directly to Canadians. they don't want to speak plainly and directly to Canadians because Canadians would be angry, deeply, deeply angry if the governments, if all the parties in my country or the Democrats and the Republicans actually said what they mean to do. The debate surrounding the frenzied disarray at Toronto's Pearson Airport was a perfect example of this. After weeks of being dogged by the chaos at Pearson and being pounded by the Conservatives to end the mandates, the federal government suspended the requirement of COVID vaccines for domestic air travel, as well as the random testing requirement for passengers coming into the country. Needing to upload one's proof of vaccination is annoying. It's a little more than that, and certainly prohibits Canadians who continue to choose to remain unvaccinated from traveling, but it doesn't lose your baggage for you or cause a flight cancellation. Ah, yes. Let's just strip a class of people of their rights, but at least you didn't lose your baggage. You didn't lose your baggage because until today you weren't allowed to get on a plane unless you were vaccinated. Yet the Conservative sloganeering solution to the mess at Pearson was simply to end the mandates. Anyone with the ability to use a search engine could tell you the situation we're seeing at Pearson is being seen in other jurisdictions as well, places without vaccination and testing requirements. That's because the root cause isn't singularly the mandates, as the Conservatives have repeatedly claimed. The problem is multifactorial in nature, including widespread staffing shortages due to COVID, both long and acute. Ho, 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 again. Pilots, many pilots lost their jobs because of vaccine mandates. That might have something to do with staffing shortages. Yeah. Oh no, things will get worse if Pierre Poilievre becomes leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, having one of the two parties ever in contention to form government in this country, led by a conspiracy theory pushing crypto bro, would basically institutionalize the worst elements of the modern conservative movement into the mainstream. Well, this woman knows nothing about modern conservatism, because modern conservatism is saying, yeah, maybe this goes too far. And then, I don't know, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 6 months later saying, okay, this is perfectly reasonable, but don't go farther than that. Rinse and repeat. Faced with multiple overlapping crises, climate change, the ongoing pandemic, and the threat of new ones, rising unaffordability, we don't exactly need to be adding the deterioration of our democracy to that list. Canadians need to put in the work to keep our democracy healthy. Oh, Canadians need to put in the work. Our elite doesn't need to put in the work. It's clear that the opposition won't do that and will even participate in trying to undermine it. This means it's up to the federal government. Yes, the people who've been lying to us and taking away our freedom and destroying our lives, let's just hand it back to them. They'll need to move beyond the agonizing recitation of governmentese talking points and start to communicate more transparently to Canadians. Once again, they will not communicate more transparently or transparently at all to Canadians because there would be a revolt. The state of our democracy will be worse off if they don't. Supriya Dwivedi is a Liberal commentator who works as a senior counsel, Liberal, that's capital L, as a senior counsel for Enterprise Canada, PR Spivery, and as the Director of Policy Engagement at the Centre for Media Technology and Democracy. Oh, I see, an NGO. You could certainly trust these people. We're completely unaccountable, by the way. Jay Rosen, and Jay Rosen is, who is he? He teaches journalism at NYU, and he's on the board of trustees of the Bond Institute. And he informs us that the Associated Press has named a democracy editor. As you know, I have been rereading Kotkin's magisterial biography of Stalin. And he talks about, well, the movement. We get to 1926, and Stalin is pretty much consolidated his power. And the so-called left deviationists are about to be run out of the party, or in Trotsky's case, run out of the country. And so Kotkin writes, Trotsky at this time jotted down some reflections. He wrote that the slogan of party unity in the hands of the ruling faction increasingly becomes an instrument of ideological terror. And I adapted that in my response to Jay Rosen. To paraphrase Trotsky, the slogan of democracy in the hands of the ruling faction increasingly becomes an instrument of ideological terror. So, this is from Aaron Wary at CBC News. Aaron O'Toole wants his party to find a balance between conservatism and populism. What if it doesn't? Oh, yes. All this concern trolling from the Antifa adjacent Canadian media. Oh, we love the Conservative Party. Please don't wreck it. Former leader says conservatives need to come up with positive change. What does that mean? It means nothing. Not add to the anger. O'Toole told CBC whoever the next leader of the party is, they will have to get the balance right between conservative traditional policies and populism. The traditional policies of the Conservative Party of Canada. O'Toole related an anecdote about going to a recent community gathering in his writing. Quote, people are coming up to me with things they're reading on social media. Boo! Conspiracies and ideas and frustration. What I try and do is say, okay, let's sort through that because what you're seeing is not correct. Whoever wins will have to get that balance right, unquote. Citing the influence of American culture, boo, and the effects of Western alienation, rural issues, and pandemic fatigue, O'Toole said the Conservatives need to come up with positive change, not add to the anger. In other words, just keep on doing what they have been doing. Aping the Liberals while saying, unleash the power of my free enterprise. And yeah, just keep on doing that. A correspondent of mine sent me some pieces regarding the issue of immigration. Now, okay, democracy, power of the people, the rule of the people. In 1966, Canada was 97% white. Today, it is about, I don't know what. Let's see, wait till the census results come out. Was it, what, 65? Something like that? So in 1968, in June 1968, just a few days before the election, I got my father to take me to a rally, a Liberal Party rally on East Pender Street in downtown Vancouver, in Chinatown, actually. And Trudeau was speaking. There was this phenomenon in Canada called Trudeau Mania, which was entirely ginned up by the media, who went into a psychosexual frenzy over this bald, hideously pockmarked, saturnine man. But it became, they memed it into a phenomenon, so I wanted to see Pierre Trudeau speak. In this one block of East Pender, there were about 10,000 people on the streets, and I can tell you, as I was quite short then, it was rather frightening. Trudeau stood on a flatbed truck and spoke to the crowd, and years later I imagined what would have happened if Trudeau had said, it is the promise, the guarantee of the Liberal Party that in 40 years, white people will be a minority in the city of Vancouver. What would have happened? Would he have been howled down? Would he have been knocked off the platform truck? And I don't know, things done to him? But no, he didn't say that. According to my correspondent, 64% of Conservative Party of Canada members oppose mass immigration. However, there has barely been a whisper about immigration during the 2022 Conservative Party of Canada leadership campaign, despite it being a major factor behind the sky-high cost of living, particularly home ownership, which is now out of reach for the vast majority of Canadians. When it comes to the issue of mass immigration, which is both unwanted and unneeded by a clear majority of Canadians in general, Conservatives, Liberals, NDP, and Greens are all sadly in agreement that more is better. And this correspondent directed me to an article from the Toronto Star. Conservatives are losing traction in ethnic communities. Will their leadership race make it even worse? I don't know. No one has asked me who I think is going to win the CPC leadership race, but I'll tell you, whoever cheats the most by forming an instant phantom army of Sikhs, because the media doesn't want to talk about this, but it is Sikhs, who 3.5%, 4% of the Canadian population, who determine all leadership races, both federally and provincially. The accusations of cheating are already flying back and forth between the Poilievre campaign and the Patrick Brown campaign. What's going to be done about it? About this cheating, which has been endemic for decades? Nothing. My correspondent comments, this article is further proof that the Conservative Party of Canada would have nothing to lose and everything to gain by supporting immigration reductionism. It is a pity that none of the 2022 CPC leadership election candidates will formally propose immigration reductionism, despite the widespread support for it in both the CPC and among a clear majority of Canadians overall. Even the frontrunner, Pierre Poilievre, who has been likened to both Ron DeSantis and Ron Paul, simply refuses to touch immigration reductionism despite his many other fearless right-wing populist policies. Well, Pierre Poilievre has no problem with the record high levels of immigration to Canada, going up to 450,000 a year. And in fact, one of his foremost campaign pledges is to ensure that people with foreign credentials, these credentials are accepted in Canada. He's going to bribe the provinces to make it so. Do you want to be treated by a doctor from Guinea-Bissau? I do not, and I don't think that many Canadians do either. My correspondent continues, in my opinion, one of the major factors behind the groundswell of support for Maxime Bernier and his People's Party of Canada is their commitment to lower the annual level of immigration from the current 300 to 400,000, higher actually, to 150,000, the annual level of immigration during the reign of late Liberal Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Actually, under Trudeau, in his final year, immigration was below 100,000. I think it was in the high 70s. She continues, if Canada were to reduce its annual level of immigration to, 300,000, 400,000, an arbitrary number first introduced by former Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and continued for the past 32 years by PMs Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, Stephen Harper, and Justin Trudeau to the historic level of 150,000, our country would still have the highest level per capita of annual immigration in the world. Therefore, my proposal is modest at best, and the Conservative Party of Canada should have embraced it long ago. The Conservative Party of Canada should be courting the votes of its single largest and most loyal voting bloc, white Canadians who are born and raised in this country. Well, the Conservatives aren't going to change their policy on this because they are the party of big business. And big business understands what Alan Greenspan explained, over 20 years ago, that immigration levels must be kept high in order to keep wages low. Pierre Poilievre he rabbits on about housing unaffordability. Well, if you're bringing in 450,000 permanent residents, that's not counting the, another 500,000 supposedly temporary residents. They all have to live somewhere. To Americans, these numbers don't sound very high. Keep in mind, there's only 38 million people in Canada, and most of them are clustered within 20 miles of the American border. So much for democracy. The conservatives bend over backwards. Jason Kenney, Curry in a Hurry, he was nicknamed. I love the immigrants more than anyone else does. Are they good for Canadians? Not a relevant question. Let's go to the chat. Hello, Oscar Toe, Dan, Pelcasso 88, Anrun, Dan Allison. Let's see, Dawn from Beyond. Oscar Toe says, I only watch Jacques Rivette films from now on. Jacques Rivette. He was Cahiers du Cinema. And, those who can't do teach, as they say. If you look at the critics, Truffaut and Romer and the like, these great filmmakers, they all began as film critics. Hello to Gamion. Enron says rebarbative ruminations. Okay. I kind of like that. I think I have the exact space heater Kevin has, says Oscar Toe. Did I tell you why I have a space heater in my apartment, in my hotel? Because they don't heat this hotel. And last December, the temperature in this room got down to about 40 degrees, let's say about 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. And so I had to run out to Home Hardware or whatever and buy a space heater. David Rice says, no to Canadian entitled to limiting. I like how Kunstler does this short essay, occasional podcast, and showing some of his interests makes good money too. Kunstler does website, by the way. David Wright adds. Chogokin 666 says they're demolishing the church across the street, established 1939. It's in the Norman Gothic style, beautiful stained glass, pipe organ, garden, spire in the shape of a pistil of a tulip in bloom, to replace by, they will be erecting a storage facility for rootless cosmopolitan transplants in the style of a huge glass box. Oscar Toe says, Chogo, you need to get that spire. Tarot Destroyer quotes Chief Clancy Wiggum of The Simpsons. Why are the pretty ones always insane? Most buildings in my neighborhood are deserted churches of one kind or the other, says Oscar Toe. I do my grocery shopping at the nearest Save On Foods, which is part of the Jim Pattison empire. And until, a couple of years ago, the Save On Foods location was a Christian Brothers school. KMG says, Metal Mike, you have a mole or bug on your face just under your nose. No, I cut myself shaving. I know it is almost impossible to cut oneself shaving with the latest razors with their triple or quadruple blades and the moisture strip all around it. But somehow I managed to accomplish this. Yo Mama says, when are scholars going to admit that democratic fanaticism is a thing? Che Blutarsky suggests the last sensible man. Hello to Buddy. Jokin 666 says, read that Mitch Decter essay, Boys on the Beach, pretty interesting. I think, yes, Dan Ellison is right. Terror Destroyer says, let's not talk about communism. Communism was just an idea, just pie in the sky. That's Boris Yeltsin. Oscar Toe says, democracy basically means left-wing authoritarianism now. Terror Destroyer quotes Solzhenitsyn, for us in Russia, communism is a dead dog. For many people in the West, it is still a living lion. Who else do we have? Metal Mike says, actually, the traditional Tory policies have always involved tariffs, immigration control, and protecting our British heritage. That ended after Diefenbaker. Well, I'm thinking it was Mackenzie King, who was the most famous or infamous immigration restrictionist in Canada. which makes him in many ways the best prime minister Canada ever had. And he was a liberal. Of course, let's see, the Liberal Party changed. When Pierre Trudeau was elected leader in 1968, the old Liberal Party of people like Robert Winters was eclipsed, soon to be put to death. Hello to Jim Bowden. And, okay. My stepson will one day become a prime minister. That's what he says. Going to a doctor now is like going to renew your driver's license. It is just fantastic, says Oscar Toe. Kevin's Palcasso88 says, how do you think Better Call Saul will end? Well, obviously, Saul's wife is going to disappear one way or another. And as I've been saying for a couple of years now, when are they going to get to the fireworks factory? That is to say, Omaha. So obviously, they're going to have to get to Omaha. Hello to David the Gnome. Oscar Toe says, I never heard of a place just cutting the heat in the winter. Seven Costanza says, Kevin, why don't you rent a room in a house much cheaper? There's a difficulty with that. Before I was, cast out into the wilderness, 2 years ago, I was renting a room in a house. If you're renting a room in a house, you have no rights under the Residential Tenancy Act of British Columbia. That is to say that whoever is actually renting the apartment can say, get out at any time for any reason or none, which is what happened to me. After a certain point, do you want a shared house? Asked Dividend. That's a good question. Seven Costanza responds, having a roommate is better than living in a motel. Yeah. See, again, renting a room in someone else's apartment, you'd have to tell them, I can't have people, coming in to my room, hammering on my door, making a lot of noise between 4 and 6 every day. Why is that? Because I do a live stream. Oh, what do you talk about? And then I tell them, and then maybe they listen to my live stream and decide that I'm a horrible, horrible person, and then they kick me out. Enron says, Kevin, have you ever shaved with a straight razor? I've shaved with what they used to call a safety razor, with the one old-timey razor blade that you would, hold it down. I did this because when I was 19 years old, I was diagnosed with a skin disease called pseudofolliculitis barbae, which means you see a lot of black men have this. You're seeing, black men, football players, baseball players, and they have these angry bumps on the front of their neck and the back of the bump. That's pseudofolliculitis. What happens is that the hairs are so curly, they don't come out, they grow inwards, causing a pseudo infection in the surrounding area to swell up. And the difficulty with using multi-blade razors is that they remove the hair from underneath. They pull the hair up and they remove it for that ultra close shave. And that makes the problem worse. And so the doctor who diagnosed me said that, shaving with these razors is not a good idea, that you can grow a beard. And I thought, no, I do not want to grow a beard. Or you can shave with a, single blade razor. And I did. And I cut my face to ribbons. And, I remember my father used a razor like that when I was a boy. And he had this thing called is it called a styptic pencil or a skiptic pencil that you would dab on to staunch the wounds. And I thought, I just don't know how people did that. Although a contemporary of mine, back when I was a young man, said that to surmount that problem, he rubbed gasoline over his face on a regular basis in order to toughen it up. Who else do we have here? Gamian says, not for everyone. I cannot stand roommates. Mark Raymond said, I was once told that Trudeau Sr. is revered as a secular saint in India. He brought so many of them here. Not as many as Brian Mulroney, though. I use a made in Netherlands electric shaver. Yeah, I can only shave with a razor about once every 3 days. I use an electric razor on the other days. And, when I don't have to be seen in public like this, I don't shave at all. Which becomes a problem as you grow older, because, it's fashionable for young men to have stubble. But when, men with gray hair have stubble, you look like a rummy. I've never had an electric razor last more than a year, says Buddy. I normally get a year or two out of mine. Okay, let's get back to it. I'm going to be talking about Edward Lutwack at some length on a somewhat different subject. This is from William Briggs 3 days ago. In an interview with Edward Lutwack, who is always worth listening to, he being one of the rare souls that crop up in history who seem to know everybody important, his interviewer for the tablet said this about the once United States. Quote, when I look at the United States from the outside, as an American-loving outsider, I see a country in the throes of one of those periodic implosions that are not entirely legible to non-Americans. You have manias about race, manias about gender identity. You have the willful disaggregation of universities and other institutions under the banner of wokeness, which is a doctrine of blind obedience to a party line established by people who are 95% illiterate and can't remember what they decreed last week. Policy is a product of hardened dogma and therefore inevitably fails. Gas prices are crazy. Nearly 50% of children in urban school systems have basically just stopped going to school. And you have a so-called elite that spits hysterical contempt for the people in whose name they ostensibly rule, denouncing them as a pack of racist, sexist, white supremacist, transphobic, gun-toting disease spreaders who will hopefully soon die out and be replaced by a more obedient class of servants. I guess it's not surprising that the American aristocracy is pretty much the worst aristocracy on earth. Bad manners, bad taste, bad art, hostile to religion and the popular arts. Their concept of largesse is to establish a foundation to combat climate change by instructing the yokels not to eat meat. The last aristocracy that showed this kind of contempt for its own people and popular folkways was the French in the days of Marie Antoinette, unquote. Parenthetically, Briggs continues, he ended that fine, accurate, rousing summary with this answer to a question many of us have. Quote, so far as I can tell, the person who is in charge of the main parameters of the U.S. government policy commutes between his mansion in Kalorama and his mansion in Hawaii on his way to becoming a billionaire, but it is forbidden to speak of him, unquote. Of course, that's a reference to Barack Obama. Now let's focus on the assessment itself. It is accurate, but incomplete, for he left out the regime's astonishing habit of elevating midwits, the ignorant, and the unteachable into command positions, behavior which itself is a symptom of their lying. They lie about everything and constantly. Take this example from Time magazine, quote, the world's food systems are being battered on 3 fronts, suffocated by climate change, shaken by the COVID-19 earthquake, and suffering from the cyclone of war, unquote. Ooh, pretty prose. That's from Lawrence Haddad. Briggs comments, they now tell open, obvious, outright, ostentatious lies, really quite stupid lies not even half as clever as a kid explaining he didn't take the cookie. And they expect us to believe them. Rather, they expect us not to dispute them, to go along with them. They use these lies as diagnostic terms. Look at Smith over there. He nodded when we said the world's food system is battered by climate change. He is one of us. He is, too, one of them. Yeah. Religion. There are some people who try to speak truth to power. Remember that phrase? Remember the media used to say that we speak truth to power? Remember that? Maybe you'd have to be old to remember that. Julian Assange spoke truth to power, really not by polemicizing, simply by releasing documents that showed what governments were really doing. And again, this goes back to the Machiavellian divide between the world of words, of rhetoric, and the world of acts. Fraser Myers writes in Spike, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is one step closer to facing 175 years in a U.S. prison. Last week, UK Home Secretary Priti Patel formally approved Assange's extradition to the U.S., where he faces 18 criminal charges under the Espionage Act. Everything about the Assange extradition is rotten. The U.S. is pursuing a politically motivated vendetta against Assange, and yet the protections that are supposed to exist in UK law, which ban extradition to the U.S. for political purposes, seem to have fallen by the wayside. I would say this is the infamous special relationship between the United States and Britain, whereby the United States says jump, or more to the point, the United States says grovel, and Britain says how low. Assange is essentially being indicted for the crime of journalism, that is publishing information that is true and accurate and which the authorities do not want in the public domain. Don't just take my word for it. That was the assessment of the US government in the aftermath of Assange's most infamous leaks. Back in 2010, Assange and WikiLeaks became household names when they published the collateral murder footage, the Afghan war diary, the Iraq war logs, and the US State Department's diplomatic cables. These generated stories that filled the pages of mainstream news outlets the world over. At the time, the Obama administration considered using the Espionage Act to punish Assange, but in the words of one Justice Department official in 2013, doing so would mean the state would also have to prosecute the New York Times and other news organizations and writers who publish classified material, including the Washington Post and Britain's Guardian newspaper. The Obama DOJ's assessment was all the more striking given that it came from an administration that had no qualms about attacking press freedom or prosecuting leakers of information. Of course, Julian Assange is not an American citizen. So this espionage, who exactly is he doing espionage for? I know certain lunatics will say Russia, because nothing bad happens in the world without that's not at the behest of Russia. This is from the medium of Pam Ho. No more omerta or the power elite, says the quiet part out loud. Recently, the Biden administration announced the creation of a disinformation governance board. Then they had to backtrack from that after the huge public outcry. Although also saying the backtrack was only temporary. People were calling it a plan for a draconian and illegal ministry of truth meant to intimidate people and coerce tech companies to censor politically undesirable speech for them. The critics derided the Democratic Party and the liberal establishment for trying to bypass the First Amendment in such an obvious and illegal way. The Democrats denied it was for anything other than shoring up the defenses of America against foreign disinformation campaigns. Then the leaks came out. Two senators, Hawley and Grassley, got hold of documents where the disinformation board's purpose is officially laid out. And what do you know? It was exactly as the critics feared. The purpose of the disinformation board seems to be an attempt to shore up political support for Democratic Party policies and corporate big money donors by working with, that is to say, intimidating tech and media companies to censor for them, i.e., Twitter is specifically mentioned. They secretly wanted to do what Justin Trudeau so openly wished he could do, to dictate with the power of the law what people can and cannot say in public. Trudeau is increasingly getting away with dictatorial power grabs in Canada, and apparently Western elites, being envious of him and other less free nations, are trying to codify their power grabs so they no longer have to hide and be fearful of exposure for what they are doing in secret. Well, here's an update on Trudeau's censorship regime. It is now going to be indirect. They're following the British model. Oh no, the government isn't going to censor you. Here's how it works. I print something on Twitter about someone or some institution, and someone complains to Twitter that this is hate speech. So Twitter is, and all the other social media platforms are liable to crushing fines, absolutely crushing fines, if they allow so-called hate speech, defined by whom, I wonder, to remain on their platform. So they'll just remove it. And we're going to have armies of people searching people like me. Uh, let's say I retweet, someone retweets me, or vice versa. Oh, so there's a consanguinity there. There's a connection. So they start going through my Twitter feed, and they could set up automated searches for a certain words, or certain patterns of words, and then the people, these Antifa adjacent people, they complain to Twitter. Yeah, we can't take a chance. We can't pay millions of dollars in fines because some guy with just over 7,000 followers says something. So we're going to remove this and probably just whack him from the platform. Well, that's what's happening. Pam Ho continues, people are not allowed to speak the obvious truth on internet platforms working with the Democrats and other rich people who influence, that is to say, intimidate, bribe them to censor for them. If someone speaks the truth and that truth conflicts with what the Democratic Party promotes as true, then a number of tech companies will not allow you to use their platform. A number of left-wing anti-war news websites have been kicked off payment platforms recently, and Google has announced that you cannot disagree with their views on the war in Ukraine if you want to use their ad service. And of course, countless people have been kicked off Twitter and other social media platforms for the same reason of speaking contrary to the official sanctioned truths of the elite. Disinformation to the elites means dis is the only information we allow to be spoken of as truth, regardless of its accuracy, because we are trying to, one, push a political narrative, or two, push a corporate narrative, or three, push a war narrative, which four, we think will benefit us, our party, our class, our bosses, our shareholders, our business. The truth is, whatever it is, whatever we say it is, and if you don't go along with it, you are not allowed on the platform. You see, it's not censorship if it's not the government doing it directly. However, if the government tells the social media companies, you better not let people like me there, then the social media companies will go, we have two choices. One, potentially pay millions of dollars in fines, or two, just kick this guy off the platform. What do you think they're going to do? So there's a woman in Alberta called Michelle Rempel. Well, now she's called Michelle Rempel Garner because she got married again. And she, very amusingly, is considering running for the leadership of the ruling United Conservative Party in Alberta. I should have said Michelle Poppers Rempel, because, it is so unfair that homosexual men are not allowed to use these highly dangerous drugs. I won't tell you what they're used for because it's too disgusting. But she is one of the young leaders of the World Economic Forum, and she wrote a piece a few weeks ago saying, these conspiracy theories about the World Economic Forum, it's just a talking shop at Davos. If it's just a talking shop, why do all of these people, including some of the most powerful people on earth, make pilgrimages to Davos, to Klaus Schwab's shrine, if it's just a talking shop? Here's a piece by Burson Phillip from the Mises Institute, which was republished at Zero Hedge. The COVID-19 pandemic featured an unprecedented fusion of the interests of large and powerful corporations with the power of the state. Democratically elected politicians in many countries failed to represent the interests of their own citizens and uphold their own constitutions and charters of rights. Specifically, they supported lockdown measures, vaccine mandates, the suppression of a variety of early treatment options, the censorship of dissenting views, propaganda, interference in the private spheres of individuals, and the suspension of various forms of freedom. All these policies and measures were centrally designed by the social engineers. Globalists, who were obsessed with societal control, decided to take advantage of the pandemic in order to increase their authoritarian power. Prominent among them was Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. In June 2020, he stated that the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. According to him, quote, every country from the United States to China must participate, and every industry from oil and gas to tech must be transformed, unquote. Oh, the WEF, this is not a movement to assume central control of the world. That's a conspiracy theory. They're saying it out loud. But never mind that. It is no secret that the WEF has focused on accelerating the implementation of central planning for the entire global population since the early days of the pandemic. This plan was to establish a new world order known as the Great Reset, was a key theme at the recent annual meeting of the WEF, which was held during May 22nd to 26th in Davos, Switzerland. Drastic changes to the world order, like the Great Reset, do not happen spontaneously. Rather, they are designed by global policymakers, including influential billionaires, politicians, celebrities, biased academics, wealthy philanthropists, and the bureaucrats of international organizations and institutions. These types of people support social engineering because it will enable them to acquire control over the world's wealth and natural resources and strengthen their ability to shape society as they see fit. Like their predecessors across history, the social engineers of the WEF believe that, quote, there must be no spontaneous, unguided activity because it might produce results which cannot be foreseen and for which the plan does not provide. It might produce something new, undreamt of in the philosophy of the planner, unquote. Based on the WEF agenda, the successful completion of the current industrial transformation will require redesigning and controlling every minuscule aspect of human life and behavior, including the private spheres of individuals, the economy, politics, and societal organizations, without the possibility of voluntary and spontaneous cooperation between individuals based on their will, values, thoughts, and beliefs. We were warned almost 2 centuries ago that when this type of tyrannical power succeeds, it will be busy with a multitude of small tasks penetrating into private life, governing families, and dictating the actions and tastes of individuals. In fact, some of the most ridiculous controls proposed by the WEF include limiting the washing of jeans to no more than once a month and pajamas once a week. The WEF also advocates for transforming entire food systems by encouraging people to consume insects, arguing that insect protein has high-quality properties and can be used as an alternative source of protein throughout the food chain, from feed for aquaculture to ingredients for nutritional supplements for humans and pets. Reforming the food system would also involve eating cultured meat, referring to meat product created by cultivating animal cells in a controlled lab environment. The WEF also supports the elimination of car ownership, as, quote, paying for a ride or delivery is as easy as tapping a smartphone app, unquote. And renting a vehicle means that car loans and insurance payments shrink or disappear. Ultimately, the Great Reset aims to create a world where you will own nothing and will be happy. By 2030, as people will not possess any property, private property, and rent everything they need in life. And by the way, this includes kitchen utensils. I'm not making this up. Danish parliamentarian had a piece published at the WEF site. Say you want to make some spaghetti, and I guess you need a pot, and you need the top for it, and you need a strainer, and you need a spatula, and you need plates and all that. So this will be delivered to you. So then you make your spaghetti, and then it will be picked up and then presumably sanitized for the next customer. I mean, this is so obviously insane that only someone at the WEF could come up with this idea. But of course, one of the luminaries of the WEF is this Yuval Noah Harari fellow who believes that people are hackable and will be hacked, and that the vast majority of people on Earth are useless eaters who will be pacified with drugs and video games. However, this premise ignores the fact that private property ownership is associated with the advancement of civilizations, higher stages of material and moral development, and the development of modern family life. The WEF scenario would also diminish the sense of security, which is strengthened by the possession of private property. As I like to say, even the meanest serf had a few precious possessions. Once the Great Reset is complete, individuals will essentially have their thinking and decision making done for them by men much like themselves, addressing them or speaking in their name. Such a desire to force upon the people a creed which is regarded as salutary for them is not a thing that is new or peculiar to our time, according to WEF. However, as various totalitarian regimes throughout history have demonstrated, the oppressive central planning of social engineers leads to the masses losing their sense of autonomy, freedom, dignity, creativity, and strength. Also lost is the incentive to improve one's own condition and contribute to the progress of society. If the social engineering of the WF is successful, then by 2030, one will not be able to rely on oneself, family members, relatives, friends, or the community. This is because the supporters any absolutist regime want traditions and customs to be corrupted, quote, memories obliterated, habits destroyed, liberty chased from the laws. In other words, they want to design a societal order where sympathy and mutual assistance will be rendered obsolete, and where every citizen of the world is equally powerless, poor, and isolated, so that people will be unable to oppose the organized strength of global governance and become dependent on governments and their allies for their survival. Eventually, nothing will protect citizens any longer, and citizens will no longer protect themselves. Yes, keep in mind, once again, they're saying this out loud. But no, speaking of the WEF and Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, Yuval Noah Harari as threats, this is deranged conspiracy thinking and a threat to democracy. Again, this is scarcely believable. I talked about controlled demolition last week. This is from the post-millennial Katie Davenport. Washington Governor Jay Inslee sent an eerie letter to his supporters last Monday, predicting that they are in for a summer of blackouts, destruction, and death. That is a direct quotation: blackouts, destruction, and death over the alleged climate crisis. The letter was sent directly after Governor Inslee gave tacit support for destroying 4 dams along the Snake River, which account for 8% of Washington's annual electricity generation. So we have a we have an energy crisis. So what are you going to do? Let's destroy hydroelectric power in Washington state. Now, why would you want to do that? This is what Inslee said. Quote, it's shaping up to be a deadly summer. As the climate crisis worsens, we're facing the most extreme summer weather in history. While Washington state faced the wettest start to the summer in over 70 years, other states are preparing for sweltering temperatures that will catastrophically disrupt our fragile electrical grid. That means blackouts, destruction, and death. Just look at the headlines, unquote. Okay, so why? So why would you want to, well, we need a reason, okay, to destroy 8% of the electrical capacity of Washington state. Endangered salmon. Yep, that's what they're going with. Endangered salmon. And this is from the Epoch Times. Kevin Stocklin. American fossil fuel companies responded Wednesday to President Joe Biden's June 14th letter that accused them of profiteering and driving up gas prices during a time of war. Biden's letter blamed gas prices, which have skyrocketed from $2.53 per gallon when he took office to $5 today, on Putin's war of aggression and greedy corporations, ignoring his own efforts to suppress American fossil fuel production. Since taking power in January 2021, the Biden administration has worked relentlessly across multiple agencies to carry out his campaign pledge in which he stated, quote, I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuel, unquote. This is how stupid these people are. It's not as if that there is a, green energy colossus that just need to flip that switch and we can just forget about fossil fuels. No, that doesn't exist. So we're going to destroy the network, which is based on fossil fuels, And guess what? The price of gas explodes. The price of electricity explodes. That also banning the burning of coal has a lot to do with that as well. Oh, and guess what? People are furious about this. Oh, we didn't see that coming, apparently. As I noted on Twitter yesterday, that come this winter, as old people in Britain and Western Europe begin to freeze to death, I suppose they can take heart in the notion that they are dying to prop up a corrupt puppet regime in the Ukraine. To what extent are journalists now feds? As I previously mentioned, I won't mention any names. There are quite a few Canadian journalists that I could point to and say, well, this person's obviously a fed, because how do you make a living? Publishing books that no one reads. You can't make a living doing that. However, if the publication of these globalist tomes is subsidized by various organizations, by various states, well, you can make a pretty decent living. This is from Kit Clarenberg at the Grey Zone. Leaked emails expose Paul Mason's collusion with senior British intelligence agent. In leaked emails, celebrity journalist Paul Mason plots extensively with Andy Price of the UK Foreign Office Counter Disinformation and Media Development Unit. Price's Counter Disinformation Unit has been cloaked behind a veil of near total secrecy since its inception. Mason and Price sketched a blueprint for an information warfare outfit funded through cutouts and modeled after the notorious Integrity Initiative. Mason pitched a Putin proxy watch project guided by InfoWar experts to attack so-called bad actors in the UK. Mason calls for suspending UK libel law to smear targets, special effects-driven project to sensationalize Russian atrocities. Mason proposed AstroTurfed Black and Asian Voices project to push back on Black and Brown critics of the Ukraine proxy war. Yeah, and this Paul Mason fellow is a real piece of work. According to Wikipedia, born in 1960 in Lancashire, England. And yes, this fellow has somehow managed to reach the top. I guess he was talent spotted at an early age. He was been described as a communist in his youth. No. I'm not a communist. Never was a communist. Just like Tony Blair was never a communist. Not at all. And this is really funny. He was educated entirely in Catholic schools. And he said, I went to a Catholic grammar school in the 1970s taught by ultra-violent priests and spent my early years in the Labour Party fighting the anti-abortionists on exactly this issue. There's no place for the misogynistic thugs of the Vatican in Labour politics. Oh, yes, ultra-violent priests in the 1970s. No, sorry, didn't happen. Didn't happen. By the 1970s, Catholic schools, there were so few priests and nuns that there were barely any of them in teaching in Catholic schools. And it was all kumbaya, and everything is beautiful. And he has, Mason has called for the alliance of, quote, bond traders from Canary Wharf, arm in arm with placard-carrying trots, unquote, against right-wing populist groups such as UKIP. Yeah, you still believe that there's a difference between the so-called left and right? In the New Statesman magazine in 2018, Mason argued the case for state suppression of so-called fascists, saying that he favored a policy of using, quote, the full panoply of security measures to deter and monitor those he described as racist, and added for clarity, unlike many on the left, that means I am in favor of state suppression of fascist groups, unquote. He added, the progressive half of Britain needs a narrative to overcome this threat, a narrative based on shared historic values of, wait for it, democracy and tolerance, and also to stop pandering to right-wing nationalism and xenophobia and start fighting it. Oh, the xenophobia. Xenophobia is so powerful in Britain, just like it's so powerful in the United States and Canada and France and Germany and Spain. And that's why all of these countries are being overrun by fractious, rebarbative immigrants. This is from Revolver News. Meet Norm Eisen, legal hatchet man and central operative in the color revolution against President Trump. In our report on Never Trump, State Department official George Kent, Revolver News first drew attention to the ominous similarities between the strategies and tactics the United States government employs in so-called color revolutions and the coordinated efforts of government bureaucrats, NGOs, and the media to oust President Trump. Our recent follow-up to this initial report focused specifically on a shadowy George Soros-linked group called the Transition Integrity Project, which convened war games exercises suggesting the likelihood of a contested election scenario and of ensuing chaos should President Trump refuse to leave office. We further showed how these contested election scenarios we are hearing so much about play perfectly into the color revolution framework sketched out in Revolver News' first installment in the Color Revolution series. Oh, here's another conspiracy theory, that George Soros is a rich, incredibly influential man who is using his influence around the globe. Well, he is. This is not disputed, except by people who say, don't pay attention to the truth, because that is a threat to democracy. Yes, war games. The TIP, as it was called, Transition Integrity Project, was an attempt to make sure that Donald Trump could not be reelected president of the United States. Did you all, or should I say y'all, have a happy Juneteenth? This is revolution from above. Until I'd say 2 years ago, Juneteenth was known by say 1 in 50 Americans had even heard of it. Maybe closer to 1 in 100. Now it's a national holiday, and Time magazine asks, "Are reparations next?" Again, before 2 years ago, the bogus Kwanzaa holiday was far more popular than Juneteenth. But I suppose we're being told now, oh, that, millions and millions of Americans have been celebrating Juneteenth since time immemorial. This is from Thomas Fazzi at Unheard. How the elites exploit inflation. The working classes needed to be put in their place. He begins, I can't help but feel a sense of deja vu. The current debate about global inflation, the similarities between today's spiraling situation and the inflationary crisis of the 70s are too striking to be ignored. Nearly 50 years ago, the oil crisis of 1973 sent inflation skyrocketing across Western countries. It was a textbook case of imported inflation, which in a context of close to full employment and strong union bargaining power triggered self-reinforcing inflationary pressures as companies raised prices to defend profit margins while workers in turn demanded wage increases. This price-wage or wage-price spiral was a response to the inflationary pressures coming from abroad, not their cause. Yes, exactly. But we have forgotten this. We've completely forgotten this because it was such a long time ago. Here's a remarkable article in The Atlantic, or the Jobs Widows blog, as we like to call it. And it's remarkable that it appeared in The Atlantic. It's by Derek Thompson. It's called The End of the Millennial Lifestyle Subsidy. He begins, several weeks ago, I needed a ride home after some late night drinks about 2 miles from my place in Washington, D.C. I pulled up the Uber app and entered my address. When the price on the screen popped up, I assumed I'd entered the wrong street and perhaps the wrong state. I carefully retyped. but the same price appeared on the screen, $50. That's outrageous, I thought. $50 for a 10-minute ride? Then I kept thinking, aren't gas prices and inflation at nearly half-century highs? Isn't the labor market so tight that low-paid workers are switching jobs at historic rates? Isn't nominal wage growth rising fastest for the kind of workers most likely to drive for Uber? Yes, yes, and yes. But something beyond rising energy and labor costs led to that startling price tag. With markets falling and interest rates rising, startups and money-losing tech companies are changing the way they do business. In a recent letter to employees, Uber's CEO, Dara Khosrowshahi, said the firm needs to make sure our unit economics work before we go big. That's chief executive speak for, we gave Derek a nice discount for a while, but the party's over and now it costs $50 for him to get home. For the past decade, people like me, youngish, urbanish, professionalish, got a sweetheart deal from Uber, the Uber for X clones, and that whole mosaic of urban amenities in travel, delivery, food, and retail that vaguely pretended to be tech companies. Almost every time you or I ordered a pizza or hailed a taxi, the company behind that app lost money. In effect, these startups, backed by venture capital, were paying us, the consumers, to buy their products. It was as if Silicon Valley had made a secret pact to subsidize the lifestyles of urban millennials. As I pointed out 3 years ago, if you woke up on a Casper mattress, worked out with a Peloton, Ubered to a WeWork, ordered on DoorDash for lunch, took a Lyft home, and ordered dinner through Postmates, only to realize your partner had already started on a Blue Apron meal, your household had, in one day, interacted with 8 unprofitable companies that collectively lost about $15 billion in 1 year. These startups weren't nonprofits, charities, or state-run socialist enterprises. Eventually, they had to do a capitalism and turn a profit. But for years, it made a strange kind of sense for them to not be profitable. With interest rates near zero, many investors were eager to put their money into long-shot bets. If they could get in on the ground floor of the next Amazon, it would be the 1 in a million bet that covered every other loss. So they encouraged startup founders to expand aggressively, even if that meant losing a ton of money on new consumers to grow their total user base. Consider this simplified example. Let's say that the ingredient labor and transportation costs of a pizza delivery in New York City average $20. If a company charges $25 for the average New York City delivery, it will make a profit. But if a startup charges $10 for the same thing, it will lose money but get a lot more pizza orders. More pizza orders means more total customers, which means more overall revenue. This arrangement is tailor-made for a low-rate environment in which investors are attracted to long-term growth more than short-term profit. As long as money was cheap and Silicon Valley told itself the next world-conquering consumer tech firm was one funding round away, the best way for a startup to make money from venture capitalists was to lose money acquiring a gazillion customers. I call this arrangement the millennial consumer subsidy. Now the subsidy is ending. Rising interest rates turned off the spigot for money-losing startups, which combined with energy inflation and rising wages for low-income workers has forced Uber, Lyft, and all the rest to make their services more expensive. Meanwhile, global supply chains have been able to keep up with domestic consumer demand, which means delivery times for major items like furniture and kitchen equipment have bloomed from 3 to 5 days to sometime between fall and the heat death of the universe. That means higher margins, higher prices, fewer discounts, and longer wait times for a micro-generation of yuppies used to low prices and instant deliveries. The golden age of bougie, on-demand urban tech discounting has come to a close. I should underscore that the old ways were made possible by an era of lower demand and weaker labor markets, which was not a winning combination for most workers. Many people drove an Uber or delivered Thai food because they didn't have competing job offers that would clearly pay more per week. Today, job openings are historically plentiful and nominal wages are rising fastest for low-income workers. That virtuous adjustment has shown up in higher Uber and DoorDash prices. This isn't the end of the story. With inflation raging, the Federal Reserve will continue to raise interest rates several more times in the next 6 months and could tip the U.S. economy into a recession. If that happens, oil prices will likely fall and rising unemployment could put more Uber drivers back on the road. At that point, rideshare prices would fall again. But the heavily discounted prices of the 2010s aren't coming back. The millennial consumer subsidy is over. And for the foreseeable future, Metro residents will have to go about living the old-fashioned way by paying what things actually cost. And again, that's Derek Thompson at The Atlantic. This pizza delivery thing is something of a mystery to me because one can buy. Frozen pizzas have gotten pretty good, pretty good, as Larry David would say. Constant sale. The last time I bought them, I guess, was a couple of years ago when I was living in Surrey. But they'd be on sale for like $3, right? And so the difficulty, I suppose, is setting your oven to 450 degrees and unwrapping it, putting it in the oven. And of course, modern ovens, you can just set it for 12 or 15 minutes or 17 minutes or whatever. And then, it will beep when it's ready. And the oven will shut itself off. So you take it out of the oven, you put it on a platter. You have one of those tools that they use at pizza restaurants where you cut it up, and there you go. So this obsession with having pizza delivered to one's door is something of a mystery to me. And I suppose there is, of course, it's a frozen pizza. You can add things to it if you like, but there is that a vestige of the satisfaction of I made this myself. Let's go back to the chat. Enron says, I love lemonade. Tarot Destroyer says, how many lottery tickets is too many? The absolutist in me says one. I was reading recently about some therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, dealing with a person who was depressed. And as typical with most of these people, they were obsessed with what they consider to be their own misery. And this therapist had an interesting idea. Like once a week, say, buy a lottery ticket. Now, you're almost certainly not going to win, but then you can spend a few hours or whatever dreaming about what you would do with the money if you won. And that will take you out of yourself. So I suppose lottery tickets have that advantage. Emma Nimpton says eating out is just not worth it anymore. I eat out at a pub once a week. And this is perhaps more of a social occasion than anything else. And the prices have gone up tremendously for both the food and the beer. I wouldn't mind that so much, but if I want to smoke a cigarette, despite the fact that I'm sitting on the patio, I have to go through a little door and then walk away and smoke my cigarette and hope that nobody steals my food and drink or, whatever belongings I have brought to the table. Oscar Toe says people are becoming more atomized simply because there are legitimate lunatics roaming outside. That's one reason. That is one reason. But the creation of these lunatics is deliberate government policy. And, having one's food delivered, this is a long process. And this, existed before the internet. I don't want to deal with any person I haven't chosen specifically to deal with because people are the worst. I'm not going to go to a clerk, when I buy my food or go to the drugstore or whatever, because then I'd have to stand across a person, and that is the worst. That person might say something to you and expect a response, assortative mating. Not just assortative mating, but assortative, kinship, if you will. I only want to talk to people, well, not actually talk to people, text with or whatever, message, people who share all my beliefs, aspirations, and choices in popular culture. Too much labor to put a pizza in the oven and wait, says Dan. Let's see, who else do we have here? Some places are canceling 4th of July events because of it, says Oscar Toe. Well, this is Juneteenth? Oh, the Empire State Building was lighted in 3 different colors, which are supposedly the Juneteenth colors. They have colors? Really? Seems highly dubious. Is it like George Floyd Day? Asked Oscar Toe. I still don't know what Juneteenth is. Okay. In 1865, some weeks after the Civil War ended, slaves in Texas were informed that slavery was done. And that was Juneteenth. That's it. That's it. Given the note says the Bible doesn't talk about Job's family, one would assume that a righteous man would have a righteous family. If you torture the data long enough, it will confess. This is Ronald Coase, Essays on Economics and Economists. That's from Terror Destroyer. The Nobel Prize winner, isn't he? Although there's people who complain that the Nobel Economics Prize is not really a Nobel Prize. T, a new name to me, hello, says I only had 2 brothers teaching in my Christian brothers' school in the 1990s Ireland, and they were elderly. Okay, let's get back to it here. And, let's go to Jim Kunstler. It's Monday, so we have a new column from him. All this and World War II. For 3 decades, since the old Soviet Union ended in a whimper, reincarnated Russia asked the West for very little, almost nothing really, certainly not the kind of aid that the USA used like a fungo bat to beat lesser states around the world into hegemonic submission. All Russia asked, after 75 years of mass formation communist insanity, was to be treated once again like a normal European nation. Early on, Russia even floated a possible application to NATO, which NATO laughed off, among many other insults to follow. But slowly after 1991, and then all at once, Europe and the USA fell under their own mass formation spell, apparently at the instigation of certain Schwabenklaus and his WEF factotums implanted throughout Western Civ like poisoned raisins in a fruitcake, rendering the EU members and the USA insane, which is to say, no longer able to entertain normal relations with others. And so, by February 2020, you get this coalition of lunatic countries preoccupied at home with the rankest political degeneracy disguised as virtue, provoking a proxy war in Ukraine with the aim of impoverishing, humiliating, and weakening Russia. And despite the massive funding and training of a 200,000-man Ukrainian military poised against the Donbass, the whole thing collapsed in misadventure as a strategic Russian meat grinder chewed through the West's proxy army like so much lunch meat, bringing us up to date. Kunstler continues, as the psychologist Matthias Desmet points out in his just published book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, the people tragically locked into a mass formation develop, among many other delusions and psychopathologies, the grandiose idea that they have an ethical duty to destroy other nations. Hence, perhaps, you can see how the dangerous mischief of Russiagate, Hillary Clinton's spoofish punkery that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, mutated into an American foreign policy psychosis. By Hillary Clinton, Kunstler writes, you must understand that I refer not just to the flying reptile of Chappaqua herself, but the party of chaos she helped create out of the diverse and inclusive body parts stitched together from the graveyard of leftist politics, socialist, communist, feminist, anarchist, Maoist, and God knows what other diverse-ists this increasingly crazed coalition of Jacobin maniacs could enlist for beating a path straight into World War III. However, having flopped in the Ukraine theater of conflict into the tune of their anthem, Get Russia, the party of chaos enters into a suicide pact with NATO as its useful idiot. They are using recent NATO draftee Lithuania to block the movement of railroad shipments between Russia proper and the geographically stranded province known as Kaliningrad Oblast, shoehorned on the Baltic coast between Lithuania and Poland. Kaliningrad had been swapped around by the principalities and kingdoms of the region from time immemorial. Its valuable ice-free port was annexed by Russia in 1758, traded variously to Poland and Prussia since then, and landed back in Russia's possession after the Second World War. Thus, blocking transport from Russia to Kaliningrad Oblast might be construed as an act of war. Smooth move, NATO. Britain is banging war drums the loudest at the moment. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, having made a suet pudding of his country's economy, apparently thinks that World War III will be a welcome diversion. And as we know from the MC in the Stanley Kubrick movie, Paths of Glory, and what's life without a little diversion? From old Blighty's nauseating world down the drain of broken empires, Germany, led by the empty suit Olaf Scholz, begins to squirm a little as it contemplates its blunder of going along with Joe Biden's anti-Russian sanctions, which comes down to burning the furniture to stay warm this coming Christmas. France's Macron just got drubbed in the National Assembly elections and is calling weekly for talks with Russia as if. Anyway, Putin is no longer in the mood for that, having been demonized without relent for years and lately demonetized by the West banking system. Kunstler declares, I love my country and all, although not so much the regime currently running it. But can you blame the Russian president? Hillary can, of course, it still does to this day. And where's her credibility at now? Exactly. Yeah. And then he has something to say about the Corona Dome, which I won't repeat. It's curious that it's pretty much everything we were told about the Corona Dome has turned out to be false and has been demonstrated false by empirical evidence. The more hazardous it is to speak the obvious truth about it. But of course, to speak the truth about the Corona Dome would imperil, wait for it, democracy. Let's check out the headlines at antiwar.com. Israel heading to elections, Lapid to become PM, U.S. allies plan for long war on Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine parliament passes new laws to purge Russian culture. Ukraine claims it used U.S. Harpoon missiles to sink Russian tugboat. Ooh, they sunk a tugboat. Well, okay. Tugboat. Yes, everyone who disagrees with turning Ukraine into a meat grinder to fighting to the last Ukrainian is, of course, a Russian bot or a Putin agent. Aaron Mate, who is a lefty, but an old school lefty, I think an honorable man, he tweets, in The Guardian, Mark Townsend calls me, quote, the most prolific spreader of disinformation, unquote, on Syria. His source is a study by the ISD think tank. Mark has failed to contact me, offer an example of my alleged disinformation, disclose that ISD is funded by the US, the UK, and allied states. Oh, yes, and the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute, all of these AstroTurf NGOs, which act solely on behalf of the global American empire. Mark Townsend is Home Affairs editor of The Guardian, former British Press Awards News Report of the Year, book about Syria, police racism, and UK gangs. It really is hard to tell the difference now between the media, Antifa, and, well, the U.S. State Department and George Soros. They're really all one of a piece now, aren't they? And the latest from Moon of Alabama. The former CIA and intelligence bigwig Graham Fuller predicts a gloomy outcome of the U.S.-Russia proxy war in Ukraine. Gloomy for Ukraine, the U.S., and Europe. Quote, contrary to Washington's triumphalist pronouncements, Russia is winning the war, Ukraine has lost the war. Any longer-term damage to Russia is open to debate. American sanctions against Russia have turned out to be far more devastating to Europe than to Russia. The global economy has slowed, and many developing nations face serious food shortages and risk of broad starvation. There are already deep cracks in the European facade of so-called NATO unity. Western Europe will increasingly rue the day that it blindly followed the American Pied Piper to war against Russia. Indeed, this is not a Ukrainian-Russian war, but an American-Russian war fought by proxy to the last Ukrainian. Contrary to optimistic declarations, NATO may in fact ultimately emerge weakened. Western Europeans will think long and hard about the wisdom and deep costs of provoking deeper long-term confrontations with Russia or any other so-called competitors. of the United States. Europe will sooner or later return to the purchase of inexpensive Russian energy. Russia lies on the doorstep, and a natural economic relationship with Russia will possess overwhelming logic in the end. Europe already perceives the U.S. as a declining power with an erratic and hypocritical foreign policy vision premised upon the desperate need to preserve so-called American leadership in the world. America's willingness to go to war to this end is increasingly dangerous to others. And Moon of Alabama comments, all the above had already been said on this website in late February and March, but it is good to see that seasoned, intelligent people are now coming to similar conclusions. And let's talk about tolerance. Frank Wright, who was a friend of this live stream, has a piece on his Substack called Against Tolerance. Tolerance is not a virtue. This is a post about tolerance and pride. It being Rainbow Month, it is time to consider what we are compelled to applaud at the moment. I will warn the sensitive reader that this post contains some detail about the rainbow lifestyle, which is distasteful. I'll break in to say that, this is a prime example of in-group, out-group, although with the, top and bottom burgers and the like, they're becoming less and less attuned, that is to say the alphabet people, to the in-group, out-group distinction. Because to be blunt, the more one learns about the lifestyle, or the quotidian, if you will, lifestyle of the alphabet people, the more disgusted one becomes. Wright declares tolerance is not a virtue. It means to endure, to forbear, which reduces to putting up with bad things. Consider then what an intolerant bigot might be. That would be someone who refuses to put up with what they know to be wrong. Modern definitions reduce the meaning of tolerance to perspective. It's simply sympathy or indulgence for beliefs or practices differing from or conflicting with one's own. This is the kind of my truth, my reality, postmodern trash we can expect from a system of values which celebrates degradation. Tolerance, in its meaning, its practice, and in its function, is utterly corrupted and corrupting. It was understood as enduring, then later as restraining from responding. It is now an obligation, because that which must be endured is everywhere, and there's no end to the putting up with things. Far from a positive trait, it is a wholly negative concept which reduces to a compulsion to submit to everything which offends common decency. Tolerance is the virtue of vice. Tolerance, like so many popular buzzwords, has expanded to a broader common perception. To be tolerant these days is not merely to permit, but to celebrate that which we know to be wrong. There's a strong argument to be made that Western values derive from those of Christianity, and that the secular West is a continuation of it without God. This was certainly the argument of John Gray in his book, which I commend to you, called 7 Types of Atheism. In his place, Ray continues, we have put man. Tolerance is one idea that does not come from Christianity. Where does it come from? With the increase in difference in society, factionalism increased between races, men and women, creeds and lifestyles. These identities have incompatible goals and values. As society fractures, something is required to prevent open conflict. That something is tolerance. Yet it has an earlier provenance than the emergent multiculturalism of the 1950s and 60s. Tolerance is a Masonic principle. It has been avowed by the self-styled scientific illuminists as early as the 18th century, by Locke in the 17th century, and promoted by humanists such as Lord Russell in the early 20th century. There is no evidence for the belief that man is supremely rational, nor that his reason will make him sane. The evidence speaks against it, in fact, and that evidence is everywhere around us. The wreckage made of the world by the removal of restraint on the self, by the wholesale destruction of common sense, and the deliberate inversion of vice to virtue is the reason that tolerance is required. It is the only social glue remaining which can hold together the shards of society. This is the result of replacing God with man. What tolerance has wrought is the celebration of terrible ideas. It is degenerative, replacing instinct and judgment with unilateral disarmament. It is to enter a conversation without the power of speech. Tolerance tells you to put up and shut up, and then to salute its flag. It leaves you defenseless against every assault, and it commands you to applaud every wound inflicted upon you and your way of life. Tolerance preaches against common sense and against basic animal instinct. It will make you less wise than a field mouse and have you respect the attraction to excrement. It will instruct you to disbelieve your own eyes, your senses, and the reflexes which preserve life from danger and from disease. The instinct most basic to the preservation of life is approach or avoid. A close second would be the disgust reflex, meaning the rejection of things we prefer not to taste. The disgust reflex is undeniable. Even in people who have been trained to suppress it in order to keep their job, it is measurable. And there's an example given here. Straight men's physiological stress response to seeing two men kissing is the same as seeing, I won't say that word because it might get me in trouble. I'll just say something very unpleasant. Why should you submit to moral lectures from Peter Tatchell, who wished to abolish the age of consent? Very good question. This is one reason that tolerance for this practice is wrapped in bright, happy colors which bear no relation whatsoever to the decision to base your identity, lifestyle, and community on your sexual behavior. This in itself would be startling had we not been nullified by tolerance. What kind of person sees their unlimited sexual appetite as the basis of their reality? Of course, the rainbow was God's sign that he would not flood the world again. It is an inversion typical of the corrupt, whose chief wish is to corrupt everything else, to make a holy promise, and to make it profane. I suppose I first noticed this, 25 years ago? This use of the rainbow to specify the alphabet people. And just the rank blasphemy of this shocked me. Of course, the rainbow was God's promise to Noah, that the earth would not be flooded again. And I began to fantasize at that time that, well, maybe now that the rainbow has been captured by the enemies of God, the earth will be flooded again. Yeah. I don't know how much of this I can read because it is disgusting and, again, may get me in trouble with Google. What consenting adults do in private. These people advance in their defense the argument that what is done in private is no business of anyone else. Firstly, it is no longer done in private. It's everywhere. Rainbow flags, multicultural propaganda. This is the idiom of mainstream media, of entertainment, of public bureaucracies, charities, of corporations, of police forces, and of armies. And there's an illustration here from the University of Potsdam and their official magazine. The cover is diversity, and there is some sort of creature lecturing. And we look up in the, not the pews, the theater. The lecture theater, there is not a single entity there which appears to be human. But this is how the University of Potsdam sees itself now. This saturation has come about precisely due to what is done in private. Privacy hardly exists any longer anyway, thanks to the digital surveillance of big data. It is the practices of these private individuals which have made a movement, and a vocal and strident one at that, in the teeth of public opinion. The rainbow movement, the alphabet people, these extremists enjoy a prominent platform. Why? They are avaricious consumers. Due to higher disposable income, they don't breed unless they buy someone's baby. They tell you love is love, when what they mean is up to 1,000, often anonymous, sexual partners over a lifetime. To them, love is just sex. And again, I'm just going to leave it like that. And just with a final word from Frank Wright, tolerance compels you to submit and to celebrate your own humiliation. Just so. Let's talk about conservatism in this context. Sohrab Ahmari, in his new Compact magazine, has a piece, National Review is Confused. National Review's Charles C.W. Cook. I first became aware of this Cook fellow some years ago. Now, he's an Englishman who translated to America. He calls himself Charles C.W. Cook. This use of middle initials is not used in England. I don't know whether he styled himself in this strange fashion when he was in England, but there are very few Americans who use two middle initials. But anyway, he's Charles C.W. Cook. He's befuddled. In a brief blog post published Thursday, he asked how. How do we reach the point at which drag queens in schools become a topic that is routinely debated in domestic American politics? How did drag queens get into schools in the first place? Why does anyone think it's acceptable, let alone crucial, to keep them there? Unquote. You might say something snapped in Cook. His realization comes more than 3 years after NR went full tilt in defense of the liberal vision of autonomy and viewpoint neutrality that first legitimized drag queen story hour and now threatens to bring it to public schools. The immediate cause of Cook's vexation was Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel's call Wednesday for a drag queen in every school. Nessel later claimed she was speaking in jest, but she is far from the only Democratic official to speak out recently in favor of having drag queens perform before children, including in public schools. I should point out, because this is relevant, that Dana Nessel is a lesbian. Amari continues, California State Senator Scott Wiener, he is a homosexual. I don't think this is a coincidence. This month mused about offering Drag Queen 101 as part of the K-12 curriculum, adding, quote, attending drag queen story time will satisfy the requirement, unquote. Thus, what began as seemingly marginal program in public libraries has now embedded itself in some urban school districts and looks poised to expand its footprint. This, of course, was the argument at the heart of my critique of Cook's then fellow NR writer David French that appeared in First Things in May 2019. It was the essay that, as Ross Douthat put it at the time, became a full employment bill for conservative pundits. It also led to 2 heated public debates and permanently altered both my and French's public receptions on the left and right. Much commentary, including dozens of books and scholarly articles, has focused on my battle cry, the only way is through, that is to say, to fight the culture war with the aim of defeating the enemy and enjoying the spoils in the form of a public square reordered to the common good and ultimately the highest good. And then he mentioned his retort to David French's Army blowhard act at one of our in-person debates. Weren't you just a jag? He does seem to have stopped mentioning it since then. But the main argument had to do with the nature of liberal claims about private autonomy. The gender ideologues and sexual revolutionaries, I contended, take the logic of maximal autonomy shared by classical liberals like French to its logical terminus. To fully substantiate autonomy claims about gender and sexuality, it isn't enough to secure the private right to do X. Rather, society must positively approve of X. Individual experiments in living, say taking your kids to a drag reading hour at a public library, cannot be sustained without some level of moral approval by the community. Autonomy maximizing liberalism is normative in its own twisted way. Thus, it represents the interiorization and fulfillment of French's worldview. The more that conservative liberals like French insist on autonomy, the more they strengthen the bully's position. This far with autonomy, they insist, but no farther. But why should the other side stop? Why shouldn't this new aggressive vision of maximal autonomy not overtake the old? This line of thinking more or less answers Cook's questions posted 3 years after the Frenchism brouhaha. It's an argument about the historical operation of liberal ideology. As Carl Schmitt pointed out long ago, liberalism always begins by asserting a private right to deviate from the public cult. We might generalize to say the public norm, but it never stops there. Gradually, the private deviation comes to swallow the public so that the deviation becomes the norm deviant. In 2019, when I published against David Frenchism, we were at the private right stage of liberal ideology with respect to drag queens reading and twerking for kids. At that stage, National Review doubled down on libertarian bromides about viewpoint neutrality and free speech, while poo-pooing concerns about the rise of drag queen story hour. In his initial response to my broadside, French championed liberal neutrality as the guardian of both Christian groups and drag queens. At one of our in-person debates, French declared, quote, I do not recognize Drag Queen Story Hour as a cultural crisis of great import in the United States of America. We are a nation of 320 million people. Some people are doing bad things here and there, unquote. Later, speaking to the New Yorker for a sort of diptych profile of us, he went further, quote, the fact that a person can get a room in a library and hold a drag queen story hour and get people to come, that's one of the blessings of liberty, unquote. Well, I'll just break in here to say that if liberty means drag queen story hour in every school library, then it's time to re-examine the idea of liberty. Back to Amari. National Review circled the wagons. Rich Lowry, Jonah Goldberg, Kevin Williamson, and many others rushed to his defense. Classical liberalism remained unquestionable, even as events continued to reveal its culturally acidic tendencies. National Review, J.J. McCullough, who's a Canadian, by the way, from Vancouver, and a homosexual. I mentioned that because it's relevant. Wrote in National Review, the United States is organized as a religiously neutral republic, and no amount of the good life can be enshrined in its institutions. Thus, even as race and gender ideologues were doing just that, if he and his colleagues would but look around them. Cook was no exception. Critics of the liberal order, he wrote, believe the system is unjust because it merely pretends at neutrality and toleration, while in fact smuggling in its own values and imposing them on the public square. But rest assured, the classically liberal order places only one condition on participants, is that they agree not to try to abolish it or permanently take it over. Beyond that, it doesn't much care how it is used, unquote. Amari concludes, and here we are. By mid-2022, the drag queen story hour private right stage has given way to the normativize and enforce stage, prompting Cook to rage. Why? The culturally conservative classical liberal constantly finds himself in this pathetic position. But I already granted you this private right to deviate. Why are you now forcing it down my throat in public? Why, indeed, one almost feels sorry for them. One is reminded that John Stuart Mill, one of the great heroes of classical liberalism, believed that societal restraints or societal opprobrium was as bad or worse than injunctions, formal legal injunctions from the state. That's to say, we used to have this thing called Bohemia, that in certain places, in certain cities, in certain places, you can go and live your weird, depraved lifestyle. Don't pretend that you are one of us. Don't ask us for our approval because it is not forthcoming. And the Bohemians didn't care what the straights thought. But now they do care. And they demand not just tolerance, they demand applause. They demand worship. And there's no other way to put it. There is no other way to put this. Yes. Hang on. I had something to say about conservatism. And it's very strange idea about stasis. Oh, sure, we'll legalize homosexuality and we're not going to go any further. Oh, gay adoption, yeah, we'll legalize that. We're not going to go any further. Registered partnerships, we'll legalize that. We're not going to go any further. Gay marriage, we'll legalize that. We're not going to go any further. Oh, we're in the midst of World War D now. We all have to publicly applaud drag queens, not just drag queens, but drag queens twerking in front of little children. That's what we are. Let's see. I wrote, as I've argued for decades, stasis does not exist in politics, society, or theology. There is instead a ceaseless struggle for supremacy. Only fools or idiots could believe otherwise. We call these people conservatives. Reminder, never call yourself a conservative. Revolver News reports June means naked tranny boobs and BDSM for kids. And again, there's a limit to what I can. There's a video here on Twitter from Drew Hernandez. Insane. A mother stands by in excitement as her toddler is exposed to half-naked men whipping each other in BDSM and doggy play attire here at Pride LA in Hollywood. From the same source, a woman forces a boy against his will to watch the LA Pride Parade as alphabet people attendees twerk here in Hollywood. And of course, my own town of Victoria, British Columbia, was not going to be left out. Last time I checked, this may have changed. Victoria, 9 councillors, 3 of them were homosexual. 3 out of 9, including the mayor, who was amusingly called Lisa Helps. So, Cora Sidaway tweets, and there's a picture here in front of City Hall. The mayor of Victoria, Lisa Helps, appears at the raising of the pride flag in drag as an act of solidarity and member of the queer community, saying these threats of violence have no place in Canada. Love will always prevail against hate and anger. And Lisa Helps, who is a woman, is appearing in drag. That is to say, she has dressed like a man, well, whatever that means nowadays, with a fake beard and rolled up jeans and bobber boots. And apparently there was one other counselor dressed up in drag. And I live not very far, 3 or 4 minute walk away from City Hall. So I went to check it out. Of course, the crosswalks there, and there are 4 of them, are in the rainbow colors. I don't know whether Ukrainian flag colors have been added to them. And I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 separate alphabet people flags on display in front of Victoria City Hall. No, not the Canadian flag, because who cares about countries anymore? It's all the alphabet people now. That's who we worship, and worship is demanded. They demand our worship. Once again, there is no other way, truthful way to describe this. Now, Matt Taibbi at his Substack has a, well, I use this word shocking. It's not shocking anymore. The world's most taboo legal case. While the media world wept over Amber and Johnny, a lawsuit filed by a feminist group over prison sexual abuse remained Earth's most ignored scandal. On November 17, 2021, the Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF, filed a civil rights lawsuit in California that drew almost no coverage. Janine Chandler et al. Versus California Department of Corrections targeted a new California state law, the Transgender Respect, Agency, and Dignity Act, aka SB 132. The statute allows any prisoner who self-identifies as a woman, including prisoners with penises who may have stopped taking hormones, into women's prisons. There was nothing TV-friendly about the scenes depicted in the complaint. And yes, we're talking about rape. Rape. Women being raped in prison by people that we are ordered to call women. Yeah. So, lawsuit ensued. And guess what? Not only is this lawsuit being totally ignored, various entities have been used to collect money in support of this lawsuit. They get shut down. And the many, because apparently you can't make a transsexual omelet without raping a few women. Once again, we live in a democracy. And democracy means that it means moral inversion. And it means that noticing moral inversion is not quite criminal, but good luck, having this expressed in the mainstream media, and you will have no luck attempting to raise money in order to take action against female prisoners being raped with the connivance of the state government of California. Now, there is something called duty of care. That people who are in state custody, the state has a duty of care to them. What California is saying, to hell with that. A correspondent sent me this story, and I was very glad that I was sent this. You want to know the state of Canada? This is from Catherine de Clercq at CP24, published Friday. Toronto will host 2 monkeypox vaccination clinics this weekend with expanded eligibility as health officials confirmed 21 cases in Ontario, with the majority in the greater Toronto region. Okay, the clinics are for people over the age of 18. They changed the story. It says that the clinics are for people over the age of 18 who are transgender or cisgender who identify as a man and belong to the community of gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men, officials said. Originally, it said 8. It said the age of 8. That's what the story said. And they went back and changed it. And guess what? There is no acknowledgement that the story was changed or why it was changed. Monkeypox. Well, it's racist or homophobic or something now. This is from Eugipius. The Centers for Disease Control releases aggressively stupid pamphlet on social gatherings, safer sex, and monkeypox. Still waiting on that 15-day anal sex moratorium to crush the curve. He begins, this is not a family post, okay? And again, this is where we are very much at a disadvantage, because these people do these things. And we are loath to report what they do for 2 reasons. One is a lot of people are not going to believe it. No one would do that. No one would do that. Of course, this Postmates campaign on their bottom-friendly food menu items, perhaps this is changing. The alphabet people are becoming bolder, and perhaps this is a good thing, because the more that we learn exactly what it is they do, the easier it will be to say this is insane and it must be restrained. Of course, the second reason is disgust. I don't want to listen to you anymore. I don't want to read this anymore because, okay, maybe it's true, but, as the old joke goes, might be put off your food. And since people eat pretty much around the clock these days, there is no time of day in which people would not be put off their food. Eugipius writes, as World Health Authorities inch closer to acknowledging that monkeypox is a sexually transmitted disease circulating almost exclusively among gay men, the CDC has posed an insanely idiotic pamphlet subtly addressed to the gay community on how, quote, you can make informed choices when you're in spaces or situations where monkeypox could be spread through close, intimate contact or during sex, unquote. Now, this is hilarious for 2 reasons. As I pointed out previously, and which is obvious to, well, everyone, that, okay, why is this a gay disease? Close, intimate contact. Well, the most popular form of sexual intercourse is called the missionary position, which results in, tip to toe, intimate contact. I know that there's some men who refuse to remove their socks during this act, and but even so, very close, intimate contact, from one end of the body to the other. The CDC are very clear that they only want to help you make informed choices. They'd never dream of telling you not to have gay sex, which is a core right of Western representative democracy that can never be suspended for any epidemiological reason whatsoever. In the CDC tract called Social Gatherings, Safer Sex, and Monkeypox, you'll discover what monkeypox is, a disease that can make you sick. Oh, thank you for that. How you can get monkeypox. Monkeypox can spread to anyone through skin-to-skin contact. How monkeypox is mostly spreading. Quote, this contact can happen when you have sex, including... no, I'm not going to read that. Nope. Not going to read that. But this is where democracy has led us, or what we call democracy. I see I've gone rather spare today. on my first two sections. And so I don't want to rush through the rest of it. I'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll talk about what Edward Lutwack has to say about the communal euthanasia of American Judaism. And I will also discuss Intellectual Property, the movie. Some of you may remember a satire program which ran in the 1990s, and it was called Mr. Show. And it was fronted by two men, although there was a cast, some of whom became well known. It was fronted by Bob Odenkirk and David Cross, who were the head writers. Let's see, who else was there? Tom Kenny has become a big deal as a voice artist, certainly. Sarah Silverman was involved. Jack Black was involved. And Jack Black starred in a particularly hilarious Gen X parody of Jesus Christ Superstar. It ran for 4 seasons, but there was a sketch. It was called Coupon, a movie. It's from the episode in season 2, The Velveteen Touch of a Dandy Fop. And it's about a movie which is about a coupon that is about to expire. And so the wife, there's a family, and the wife, discovers this coupon, and it's expiring tonight. So there's a mad dash to get to the store, because we'll save money with this coupon, and who doesn't like saving money, right? And the whole thing is preposterous, of course. And the movie is not a success. And so the Hollywood executives are absolutely furious about this. Why do they hate us so much? Meaning, the movie going public. Why are they trying to hurt us? We have put so much into this movie. It's not fair. And we're going to seek legal redress. And so they do. And a judge orders that every American must see Coupon, the movie. And you see the tagline, a must see, by court order or mandatory, right? And then it becomes a success. And then back in the 90s, you used to have these incredibly annoying ads. I suppose it was first in the 1990s that movies, perhaps in the 80s, that movies were sold. This was the #1 movie of the weekend, so you have to see this movie. You don't want to be the schmuck who misses out on the #1 movie, right? Because everyone else is watching it, so why aren't you? So they run these commercials of people who were supposedly filmed in the lobby just raving about how much they love this movie, whatever movie it was. And so we see David Cross in the lobby, and he says of Coupon, the movie, I saw the crap out of it. He didn't use the word crap. He used something stronger. But that's the point. I mean, this was rather prescient there. Oh, was it particularly good? Well, no, but I saw it. I don't want to be one of these people who didn't see it. And later, of course, we get Coupon, the movie, The Ride. And, of course, that was rather prescient as well, because then it started to go the other way. Pirates of the Caribbean began as a ride, which became a movie franchise. But you'll have to wait tomorrow for my musings on Intellectual Product, the movie. Let's have a final look at the chat. Okay. Tom Kenny, yes, is the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants. Indeed, he's a very funny man on his own. Anwar says Odenkirk has been funny even going way back. Stevie Grant and Porno Gill on Curb. Oh, yeah. I think that Mr. Show was, of course, all these sketch shows are hit and miss. But no, it's one of the best sketch shows ever. I don't know which one it is, whether it's Odenkirk or the other guy, David Cross. This obsession with old timey stuff, like vaudeville stuff, megaphone wars, or well, not megaphones, the Rudy Valley type of device where you'd shout through it. Oscar Toe asks, is Kevin a SpongeBob fan? I have never seen it. Perhaps I should, but I have never seen it. Anwar says David Cross always gave me the creeps. He does have that. Yeah, he definitely does have that. Oscar Toe says, I honestly don't think the left can handle a Nick Fuentes story time. It might end the drag queens for all time. Yes. Oh, no, I wanted to... I mentioned something. Andrew Sullivan, you remember he wrote this book, this best-selling book, very influential, called Virtually Normal? Virtually Normal, huh? Huh? Well, you see, if you let men marry other men, they're going to settle down. And this rampant promiscuity that we see, we're not going to see it anymore, right? Well, they got their gay marriage, and that didn't happen, did it? And so Andrew Sullivan had a curious thing to say about the war against World War D, and I'll read it to you. Okay, yes, Elmer Fudd. Elmer Fudd is involved. Sullivan tweeted, every Christmas season, British parents take their kids to pantomimes where a drag queen is always one of the stars. Real Chris Rufo says they're taking their kids to see trans strippers. The post-truth right has truly arrived. I responded, yes, and Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd dress up as women too. The difference is that Panto and Warner Brothers cartoons are not depraved expressions of furious hostility to women, and you know it too. I once took my kids to pantomime, and it starred Bruno Gerussi. He was a big star in Canada for many years, and he played what they call the Widow Twanky character. Now, this is a man who is dressed up as a woman for comedic purposes, that he's obviously not meant to be a woman or any kind of an expression of woman. He's just a laugh line. And, of course, one gets the impression that what these drag artistes are saying is, we are the real women. Women are not a costume. They are a sex. And why so many women seem to be so enamored of World War D, something has gone wrong with them. Something has broken them. Of course, obviously when one sees these women, these mothers, dragging their toddlers to these drag shows, I've got a pretty good idea of what's going on here. My child is special. Because, of course, when you have two, or most likely one child, that child had better be special. Because otherwise, what was the point? Again, as I've said previously, if you have large families, let's say 6, well, you can expect that 2 of them are going to be world beaters, and 2 of them are going to be duds, and 2 of them are going to be somewhere in the middle, right? But, one would expect a mother to love all her children equally. But if you only got the one, then that child has to be special. And that child can't be normal, because normal is bad, because normal isn't special. And so, we went from learning disabled to on the spectrum, because that's something you definitely want to boast about, that, my child has autism, which on the one hand is supposed to be a crippling disorder, but on the other, it's supposedly something to celebrate. Greta Thunberg calls it a super power. oh, and my child has mental illness, and because of course there's so many people under the age of 40 now who claim to suffer from mental illness, that in that demographic it is now normative. So claiming to suffer from mental illness no longer makes one special. And on that bombshell, I'm going to wrap it up. We'll have a final comment from respectable commenting name. Honestly, all the evils we can observe today are purely from generations of apathy. Not enough men to care to keep the women in their lives from their worst excesses, and it's all snowballed to here. Yes, just so. So, thank you all for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. As always, I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization, civilizational collapse, and World War D, I hope that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.